Well, I think we'll get going. This is John Kinch with Michigan Energy Options. It is a lovely solar gain day here in Grand Rapids where we have our West Michigan office. Marta, what's it doing in sunny Denver?
Oh, it's nice and sunny here. Beautiful morning.
Yeah. I think you guys in the sweepstake for sun probably are one of the better places in the United States, but Michigan still is awfully good itself.
Sure is.
Well, thank you. So this is the third in our series of summer conversations around solar. I want to thank Marta Tomic of Vote Solar for joining us here. And also, I think we're going to do three more in the wintertime, and we have a little bit of a lineup put together. Michael, can you click over to that slide? Thank you. So in December, I hope to talk to Seth Mullendore of the Clean Energy Group. Seth is an expert on solar plus storage around the idea of resiliency. We're also going to, in January, have a conversation around the Detroit Solar Feasibility Study that Elevate Energy spearheaded. Michigan Energy Options was one of the partners on that project, as was EcoWorks, the Detroit Office of Sustainability, Detroit Collaborative Design Center, the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, Data Driven Detroit, and an organization known as NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Lab. So it was quite a team. Our results from this study should be coming out here in the next couple of months, and it was a good piece of work, I think. And then for February, we're still kind of kicking around ideas. So those of you who are listening today or pick this up as a recording later on, please send us some ideas of something you'd like to hear. The only criteria is that it has to be about solar and has to have at least some kind of tie to Michigan. Next slide, Michael. So I want to introduce Marta Tomic. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Marta and Vote Solar's work over the last couple of years as we've been together working on common efforts around strategy for community solar, around good business models, and around policy. So she's going to do several things with us today. The intentions are really to get a good working definition of community solar around the country, what it is and what it is not. Marta's going to point out to us some of the models I think that she sees around the country that are working, and also provide us some commentary as where she sees Michigan in that group. And then lastly, we're going to have a conversation around low to moderate income populations and how we can help them get more access to renewables, and in particular more access to solar. If you have questions during the presentation, you can send them into the chat box, and Michael Larson, my colleague, will be curating those, and he'll interrupt us if he has a question that's germane. Otherwise, plan on saving about 10 minutes at the end of the presentation to have a question and answer with you, our audience, all right? So with that, I want to thank Marta for joining us and ask her to say a little bit more about yourself and Vote Solar, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, John, and thanks for the opportunity to join the discussion today. I'm thrilled to be here, and on this slide, I did want to just flag that as of about a month ago, I've been given a new role at Vote Solar, and I'm now serving as our Senior Director in the Interior West. But the reason that I'm here today is that for the last 2.5 years at Vote Solar, I served as our Community Solar Program Director, where I worked on community solar programs and policies across the country. And in just that short time, worked on community solar in at least 17 states, both in the legislative and regulatory space, and had wonderful success working with great partners like Michigan Energy Options and others across the country. And so in those campaigns where we did win, we were in just a short amount of time able to support the near-term deployment of over 3 gigawatts of community solar, providing access to over 175 households across the US. So this is a really exciting topic, and I'm happy to dig in more. In the next slide, I want to just highlight a bit about Vote Solar. We are a national nonprofit organization that works to foster economic opportunity, promote energy security, and make solar a mainstream energy resource across the US. Our team provides a combination of deep technical and policy expertise to state-level legislative and regulatory work across the country. And these are really big campaigns that we take on, and we recognize that we can't get there without strong and diverse coalitions, grassroots engagement, all of those great things that are necessary to advance solar programs. And we have a vision at Vote Solar where we envision 100% of our clean energy. If you take a look at the next slide, we have a nice diagram here showing our vision of 100% clean energy in which all consumers are empowered to take full advantage of solar power and other clean energy resources to reliably and affordably meet our country's power needs. And we feel that solar should be at least 50% of this overall goal. And to get there, in our strategic plan, we've highlighted 5 program areas here. So these include rooftop solar, community solar, utility scale solar, access and equity, which is something that we feel needs to remain central to any legislative and regulatory campaign, as well as a program that we have focused on grid modernization to make sure that we're achieving these significant levels of solar deployment and taking full advantage of the benefits that distributed energy resources can provide. So now that I've given a quick overview of Vote Solar and why we're here today, I thought I'd dig right into community solar, and which is one of those central pillars of our work at Vote Solar. Many of you that have worked on community solar or have been interested in the topic have maybe heard that 3 out of 4 homes across the country do not have access to traditional on-site solar. This is an issue. This is an issue if we want to achieve these large clean energy targets that we're seeing pop up across the country and have a meaningful transition to clean energy. So to get there, we really do need an option for everyone to access local solar. Next slide, please, Michael. So from my perspective, I see one of these key solutions being community solar. And this is the working definition that Vote Solar has, which is really just referring to local solar arrays that are shared by individual community members. And those individuals subscribe to a single project and receive credits on their electricity bills for their portion of the power produced. And so this is a really easy diagram here, just showing that there's folks, different organizations, household businesses that might sign up for a certain number of panels within a shared solar array. So in the next slide, we dig in a bit more on the definition, just to clarify a little more, because we do call this webinar Community Solar Like, and the term community solar has been used in so many ways across the country. Again, this is Vote Solar's working definition, where individuals really do need to receive a credit on their electricity bill for their share in a community solar facility. We also feel strongly that individuals must be tied to a specific project, and also that project should be a new project when it's originally built, not just one that's been repurposed or already been paid for and simply reused for subscription. So for us, that additionality component is very critical. In the next slide, I just want to distinguish a bit from green tariff programs or voluntary green pricing programs, which are very popular around the country. These typically involve the sale of renewable energy credits from a clean energy facility to individual subscribers. And so that means you're getting your electricity, you can call your electricity green because you're getting those renewable energy credits or the environmental attributes from a renewable energy facility. It does have some great attributes to these programs, which are pretty flexible contract terms. It's a great way for people to meet individual sustainability goals. But one of the key distinctions here is that these programs typically require people to pay a premium. You're paying extra to be able to call your electricity green by purchasing renewable energy credits. And so for us, that doesn't meet one of those core tenets of what community solar can and should deliver. And furthermore, it does continue to be a barrier for low-income households and those that need to have a viable way to gain access to local solar. So any offering that does cost a premium is something that we tend to call out if we're looking for. So moving on to the next slide, just thought it was helpful to provide a quick snapshot of where community solar is. This colorful graphic here was in your light blue here, states that have taken action and passed laws to create new statewide programs. So throughout the rest of the presentation, you might hear me refer to these as policy-driven markets or statewide programs. There's 19 states in the District of Columbia that have created these statewide programs. And then in the dark gray and the light orange, you see how many states there are that have implemented voluntary programs. So these are voluntary utility-led programs, either by investor-owned utilities, rural electric cooperatives, or municipal utilities. And what I find really interesting here is that the policy-enabled markets account for over 70% of all of the community solar capacity that exists across the country. And so it's really states that are creating new laws and programs where we can see community solar make a meaningful contribution to achieving these clean energy targets and seeing significant solar deployed through community solar.
Hey, Marta, this is John. May I ask a quick question on this point? For the one-off programs, the 1 through 5, that includes Michigan. So could you just explain again a little bit more about what this means by one-offs?
Yeah, so in this graphic, we might capture some exciting projects. There's one that I've highlighted later in the slides of a rural electric cooperative in Michigan that has voluntarily decided to offer their member owners a community solar program. And so this isn't the policymakers in the state placing a requirement on the utilities to implement community solar. These are utilities recognizing that their customers or their member owners are really interested in having a way to access solar if they can't put it on their roof. And so on their own, they're moving forward with one of these voluntary programs to really meet customer demand for local solar and solar access.
And for sake of argument, I think if we have 5 one-offs, maybe there's been a couple more added recently, but if these are utility-led programs, it's worth noting that Michigan has 65 utilities.
We've got a long way to go.
Okay.
Great. So just want to briefly also highlight that on the next slide, when we think about community solar, we recognize that it really does provide an effective way to expand access to underserved communities. And so that's something that's very important to us at Vote Solar through the economies of scale, through some interesting financing options. The fact that there are just multiple subscribers for a single project really does break down a lot of barriers to low-income households, to moderate-income households, or others that have traditionally been left out of the clean energy economy. And so of those 19 states with policies in place, only 11 have incentives or carve-outs to facilitate the adoption of low to moderate-income households. That's identified as LMI on this slide. So just a couple examples here. Massachusetts is a great state that in their recent incentive program provides a 6-cent per kilowatt adder for projects that serve at least 50% low income. New Jersey is a relatively new state, has a new program that actually requires that 20% of the state's pilot program capacity in the aggregate. So each year, 20% of the community solar projects that can be awarded is reserved for low and moderate income households. So that requirement ensures participation, but the regulatory authority in New Jersey also implemented an application process that prioritizes community engagement, substantial bill savings, local siting, and among some of these other factors to make sure that they're really maximizing benefits for any household, business, nonprofit, or local government that's participating in these projects. And then just quickly in Illinois, Illinois has gotten a lot of attention recently, and the state's Solar for All program just made some awards, about 2 weeks ago. And there's a great project called the Rockford Solar Project by Trajectory Energy Partners that was just awarded capacity in this program. And we're seeing some really interesting low to moderate income focused projects. This one's sited on a brownfield owned by the city of Rockford in both an environmental justice and low income community. The developer took the time to establish a great partnership with the local alderwomen and neighborhood groups. And the Rockford Housing Authority is the anchor tenant, which means that they're taking a large portion of the community solar facilities output. And then the rest of the project is offered to local low-income residents first, with a minimum of 50% savings for the energy portion of the bill. So the key takeaway here that I just want to flag is that yes, incentives and carve-outs are an important policy tool to spur low-income community solar development, but really more is needed. We feel strongly that community engagement and a process to establish local decision-making is very important, and then also the need for states to look at inclusive financing options to help overcome the perceived risk of serving low-income communities. So we have more on a great resource called lowincomesolar.org highlighted here. It's a website that's run by both Grid Alternatives and Vote Solar, covers a range of low-income topics, including community solar. So just a few slides left here. On the next one, I just want to highlight some of the business models that are out there. I did spend a lot of time focused on statewide programs so far, because that's where I spent a majority of my time. But regardless of whether we're looking at a statewide program or a voluntary utility-led program, ownership matters. Ownership matters because this is a large portion of where the benefits accrue over the 25-year life of a project. And so I've listed out here a range of different ownership structures of community solar-like business models. There are some also a variety of subscription types. There are two that are most common. The first that's listed here is an upfront purchase for a certain number of panels. And this really allows people to earn a return on their investment over the long run. Another very common subscription type is called a monthly subscription. And this is really similar to your Netflix subscription, where you're paying a certain amount per month to be able to get the benefits of a particular service. And so with your monthly subscription, you're not paying anything up front and you're receiving a percentage discount off of your monthly electricity bill. And so I also want to flag here that the distribution of benefits from a community solar array is an important topic. How are you going to benefit from your subscription in a community solar array? It's an important question. And so what we'd like to see at Vote Solar is that individuals get savings on their electricity bills. We're really looking for affordable clean energy solutions, and community solar is a great way to do that. Another community solar-like business model that I wanted to flag here is one that's cooperatively owned. There is a really interesting model out there, one that was pioneered by a group called Cooperative Energy Futures in Minnesota, where communities are actually empowered to be members of a shared clean energy cooperative. So this really facilitates long-term ownership and control of a solar project. And then the last bullet I have here that I've put in quotes is green electricity. This is a benefit that you can receive from green tariff programs that I previously mentioned. But again, this is going to be green electricity rather than savings on your electricity bill. So in the next slide, I work Vote Solar and the Interstate Renewable Energy Council took a look at all of these business models that are out there, all of the different programs that were being identified as community solar, saw that there was a lot of variation in the types of programs that were offered, and really wanted to come up with a way to systematically evaluate what these programs look like and what they should achieve. And so we created a checklist last November. It's available for free at the URL at the bottom of the screen here, where we really wanted to create a tool that allowed anyone, whether it's an advocate, whether it's a regulator, whether it's a utility designing their own program, to really look at a series of categories of the ideal utility-led community solar program. And this is for investor-owned utilities, for municipal utilities, and rural electric cooperatives. We saw that there's so much opportunity for these programs to grow across the country. And we're hoping to just be able to create a little bit of standardization in how you review these programs through this checklist. So I won't read through all of these bullets, but encourage you all to take a look at this great resource. And the goal really is to create the most consumer-friendly program that's out there that really does provide folks access to local solar, that saves money on their electricity bills, and is inclusive with meaningful low and moderate income provisions. That would be our goal of any of these programs.
Marta, may I follow up with a question real quick on this slide?
Absolutely.
Is implied in this list anything about the value of solar? And by the value of solar, I'm talking about locationality of it, the grid stabilization that it could provide, the environmental benefits it could provide, located it on brownfields, things along those lines, in which the utilities are recognizing the solar as not something which is a base load fuel, but rather has all these other attributes to it.
Yeah, so in that last bullet, which is to optimize community solar to benefit the grid and the community, we did call out the need to fully capture the costs and benefits of community solar as a distributed resource, recognizing that there are tremendous benefits these projects can provide the grid if they are strategically sited. So we didn't call out the methodology for how to appropriately value that resource, but did recognize that that is incredibly important. So 100% with you there, John,
Yeah.
that valuation is really important, particularly for community solar to scale over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And then on the brownfield question, we did highlight that. There, I think that community solar, of all of the market segments that are out there, are seeing a big push for these projects to be developed on brownfields, previously utilized lands, carports, canopies, but these do come at an added cost. And so we're in full support of seeing these projects sited in places like brownfields, as long as the incremental cost for developing a project on those sites is covered through the program, because it certainly can be cost prohibitive in many instances.
And isn't that sort of implied when you had the slide regarding the pros and cons of green pricing options for customers, is that those voluntary green pricing programs are relatively cost friendly, even though there's a premium involved, but they might be relatively cost friendly in the sense that it takes there's a lot more expense in developing community solar projects, especially if you're developing those on brownfields, because there's a lot of churn going on with customers and so on and so forth. Whereas a VGP project could conceivably come out of a utility scale project, which is relatively straightforward. So is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair to say.
Okay.
Great. Well, with my last slide here, I just wanted to focus our time a bit here on Michigan. Last year, we also worked with GTM Research, now Wood Mackenzie, the Coalition for Community Solar Access, and Grid Alternatives on a report that looked at how community solar can scale over the next decade. And so in that report, we did touch on the evaluation of community solar costs and benefits. There is a great section on it with a slide that calls out all of the categories that should be assessed in any valuation approach, John. So that might be a great resource for folks to look into. But in that report, we actually did a deep dive into 4 states and included Michigan in that analysis, again, available at the URL below, votesolar.org/csvision. So we found that there's tremendous opportunity for community solar to grow and scale in Michigan. And the chart on the right here, we really wanted to take a look at the total addressable market. And GTM found that there's 3.9 million customers, with the majority of those, 95% in fact, being residential households across the state. And if you all remember that that little tidbit earlier, that 75% of homes can't install rooftop, this is a huge potential market in the state, huge customer base that can't access local solar in Michigan. And so there is a significant need to pass a statewide community solar legislation in Michigan to make sure that we're providing a viable option for everyone to go solar in Michigan. Some of the other bullets here, which are key recommendations for Michigan and other states, is that to have a successful program, you really also need to have fair and stable bill crediting. No one wants to sign up for something if they don't know what it's going to cost them in a year. And so you really need to have that transparency through the crediting process. It's also important to think about the benefits that an open and competitive solar market can deliver. If you have a diversity of ownership types, if you have different business models out there, that in turn continues to drive costs down and can maybe help provide access to some underserved communities, whereas other business models might not. As with any type of solar development, it's really important to have a transparent and streamlined interconnection process for these projects. And then, as we noted throughout the slides earlier, having targeted policies to promote local solar access by underserved communities. And then lastly, looking at how to craft this policy in a way that ensures sustainable and scalable community solar growth. Many folks that have looked at community solar before have probably seen the nearby state of Minnesota being identified as one of those leaders. And for a state that enacted a program in 2013, they now have over 600 megawatts of community solar because they did structure their program in a way that allowed for scalable community solar growth. So these were the key recommendations that came out of the report. I'm actually thrilled to see that there is a working group right now at the Michigan Public Service Commission with one of the key recommendations also indicating that we really need to see community solar legislation in Michigan. John, I think you're part of that working group. Is there anything else you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I have been part of that group that Katie Traxel has been gathering folks in the industry for the last, I think we've had 3 meetings total over the last several months. It's been very productive and very engaged in terms of what we were doing and the conversations we were having across our professions. And just to underscore what you just said, there's a draft result report out recently, and really the top line proposal is that Michigan needs to have some kind of legislation that has a carve out for community solar. So we'll see where that goes next, but I was encouraged by that outcome.
That's great. Yeah, and I'm aware of at least 2 bills that have been considered in the past. I think it was 2015 and 2017 or 18 that there was a community solar bill that was drafted, and hopeful to see another one move forward next year.
I also just add, I think we benefit from the fact that our fellow Midwestern states, Minnesota and Illinois, have gone before us, so that we can kind of look at what they've done and see what went well and what might have needed to be tweaked a bit, so that we can design even better legislation and then implementation here in Michigan.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, there's this has been a relatively new market segment. Well, we're in 2019. These programs really started back around 2010, so I wouldn't call it new, but you know, there's always a lot we can learn, and I think we're in a really good place where states that are taking off now, like you said, have a lot to learn and can really hit the ground running with some great programs.
And we just got a quick comment from Katie here saying that comments on the third draft report are due on October 4th. So any comments on that are certainly welcome. So.
And Michael, I'm assuming it's on the MPSC's page, right? So that folks can click on that and get the document.
It should be correct.
Okay. Great.
Great. Well, John, I'd love to open it up for questions. I do have a couple case studies that we can save for later, but
Okay.
that's really easily digestible on folks on their own time, since I've got some nice detail in those case studies. So if there's any questions, I'd love to open it up for a dialogue.
Okay, let's do that. We can also, you and I agreed we'd share our webcam so folks can see we're not just ethereal voices, so people can see where. There you are. Hi.
Hey.
Good morning. I got a quick follow-up, a couple questions I want to ask you about. This whole the dynamic between whether it's a subscription model or whether it's an upfront pay model is an interesting one. Our own project, our own modest project, was challenged, frankly, by having to gather up money from people ahead of time before we could move forward to develop it. On the other hand, that model does allow for you to have at some point in time, 10 years out, a return on that investment, whereas subscription models typically don't have that component to that. On the other hand, subscription models, I think, are friendlier to low to moderate income populations. Could you talk about the tensions that are out there between those two models in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they both play an important role. At Vote Solar, we haven't been ever prescriptive about which is the right model, but I think there are tensions, like you said. That upfront per panel purchase, that might be really appealing to folks that can afford the upfront investment or recognize the long-term benefits. It's a lot of how early rooftop solar adopters went. They installed solar on their roof. They had a payback after a certain period of time, and then after that time, their electricity was free from the solar that was generated on their roof. So similarly with that upfront panel purchase, after that investment's paid off, that there's a significant opportunity to get some savings and revenue from that project over the 25, 30-year life. But we also recognize that paying for a big chunk of panels up front is a big barrier. And so when we're really focused on expanding access, that upfront cost barrier is a problem. And so we have seen the monthly subscription model really take off across the country. A lot of third-party providers spend most of their time focusing on that model because I think they've seen the most success with it, where you can get a percentage discount off of your bill each month. The downside is just that you don't have that long-term ownership stake. So you feel good that you're participating in a local project, but you maybe don't receive the same level of economic benefit. I will just highlight, I remember a couple years back when I was spending quite a bit of time looking at rural electric cooperatives, there's one cooperative, Connexus, that initially had that upfront per panel purchase, and they had a really hard time signing people up for it. And then they took a moment to just revisit what was going on with getting folks to sign up. And they decided to also offer that monthly subscription. I think they called it pay as you go model, and they sold out. I mean, it was just really interesting to be able to offer both subscription types and just notice the difference for each project.
Marta, following up on that question, if you don't mind me real quick, John. One of the questions we had in chat is talking about on-bill financing, or and how have you seen trends in on-bill financing for community solar, and how that low no interest may help that along, or is that just kind of another version of that subscription sort of system?
It's a great question. I actually like to draw a distinction between that monthly subscription versus the on-bill financing, because on-bill financing effectively allows you to finance that upfront panel purchase on your electricity bill while still receiving savings each month. And so it does provide a low cost, affordable way to get to that ownership position through a financing option on your electricity bill. And so we've seen this model deployed pretty extensively for energy efficiency measures. You know, there's a model called pay as you save. So you're paying for your energy efficiency improvements, but you're still saving each month. So it's a great customer value proposition, really appealing. I haven't yet seen it for community solar. I know there's interest in doing it. John, are you familiar with any projects that have moved forward?
No, not yet. I mean, we have in Michigan, we have both PACE and Michigan Saves, which are good ways to try to move the needle on solar. I like the idea that the on-bill financing is actually a way to eventually get to ownership or leasing and having some kind of return on investment versus a subscription rate. I think that does make a lot of sense to me. I mean, one of the challenges as well with community solar, I think, and I've had a conversation or two with some utility folks, is that it's kind of a Goldilocks problem, that they have a monthly subscription that might be not strong enough terms in terms of keeping people in the program. And on the other hand, our project in particular has a 25-year contract with people. So 25 years is a barrier. It's too long for many people. But having somebody be able to come in and out of a project every few months, I think also creates challenges for those folks that are doing those projects, those utilities, or even those third parties, because that's a lot of work to manage all those people coming and going. Something needs to be kind of figured out in between.
You're absolutely right that the customer enrollment process, you know, with rooftop solar, you've got one customer. With community solar, you could have hundreds for a single project. And so thinking about the time it takes to enroll everyone, keep them a subscriber, that is absolutely an added cost. At least with your project, with that long contract term, you know, since they paid up front, they're going to be benefiting in the long term. So that absolutely makes sense. I'm curious, do you have an option for folks to transfer their subscription or end the contract if needed?
Yeah, we have all that transferability stuff in there as well. And that took a long time to figure out legally, working with the utility as to what's reasonable, what's not, and so on and so forth. We've had, I think, one or two we've already had to do the transfer on, but yeah, I still think there's some ways to figure out some terms and conditions per your slide about, you know, maximizing the customer's experience and meeting them more than halfway so that they can participate. I think that's really important. Hey, Michael, do we have questions for the from the audience either in chat, or do you want to open up the mic?
Yes, we've got a couple comments here as well that I would just like to kind of throw out there.
We're down to our last 6 minutes. Just taking a look at the time.
Sure. And this is just a little bit interesting. Ken Freestone here, he makes a comment, said that in our community, they offer 10% grants and on-bill financing for homeowners to do deep energy retrofits first before helping with solar. And he's just kind of throwing the question out, you know, are there other communities that offer grants and incentives, you know, that have helped, you know, with both of those pieces in the past that you're aware of?
Yeah, I am. I think it's great, you know, when one of the ways to look at how much we're impacting people is to look at energy burden, which is the percentage of income spent on energy expenditures. So if you can combine energy efficiency with community solar, that's going to make a bigger impact down the road for someone's household. So Colorado Energy Office actually has a great report. They offered a grant to Grid Alternatives, about 2 years ago, to work with a number of rural electric cooperatives in Colorado. And a majority of those projects combined energy efficiency and community solar to, one, maximize the savings for those households, and then also think about the comfort of their home. You know, if you're signing up for community solar, but your house is leaking air, that's not great. So that's the Colorado Energy Office on their website. They do have a report to highlight the results of that demonstration project, and there's some really exciting findings in there.
All right, we've got another question, is that as far as community solar goes, how could a corporate, municipality, or university anchor tenant make a big difference in helping getting community solar projects off the ground?
Yeah, John, do you want to take that one?
Well, I think absolutely. I think this notion of having an anchor tenant is key to making these projects work. And one thought, going back to my Goldilocks analogy, is that you might be able to work out in a community solar project in which you have an anchor tenant or two that are going to be willing to have a long-term contract of 20 years because they know, they're going to be around for 20 years, a city, a school system, whatever. And then perhaps you could then within that structure offer shorter term contracts with, small businesses and residents like 10 years. And that way you'd have some stability from the large anchor tenants that the project is going to be viable in the years ahead, but also provide some flexibility to others who may not necessarily want to be committing themselves to that long of a period of a contract.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that certainly can provide a lot of flexibility. And then I have also seen business models out there where that anchor tenant might maybe just pay, not pay extra, but maybe pay the same amount, maybe sort of not voluntarily offer to pass some of their savings on to local low-income households as sort of a voluntary subsidization, cross-subsidization within their own project. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and having that institutional anchor tenant really does give you a lot of flexibility. So that's a great way to go.
And to give a shout out to Groundswell, because that's their business model, as I understand it from talking to them out of DC. So folks should take a look at their website and what they're doing. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
More questions, Michael?
I think we've kind of got just another comment about monthly subscription models and the subscription agreements that have fees, to be a subscriber, like an enrollment fee. Is there really no cost to become a subscriber, as a result, or are subscription fees being kind of charged out there for some of these projects?
So it depends. It depends on each provider and their offering. I think it's most common with third-party providers that you don't see an upfront enrollment fee because they have to sort of compete with one another. That's most common, but certainly have seen programs out there where there might be an initial deposit just to get folks signed up. I've seen that with a lot of utility-led programs, just so we can see a little bit of a firm commitment early on that there will be subscribers participating in the project, and honestly have a little teeth in the game so that we're confident that there's a smooth rollout once the project is live. John, in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need to have, you're going to have to suggest. One of the conversations that I've had with a number of utilities is this idea that they like the idea of community solar, but they also want to know if there's a real market out there or not for them. And so, we've been trying to help on that front to help establish whether or not there's enough interest in the community to make a project move forward. Otherwise, folks are wasting a lot of time and energy and money.
Okay.
So part of the issue about community solar needs to come from the community. The community needs to speak up. And there's ways you can reach your utilities. There's ways you can reach your local governments and have a conversation, make some noise about wanting to see this. That helps.
All right. I think that about does it, on my end here, and coming up on time, John.
Okay, good. Well, Marta, hey, thank you. This has been wonderful. I want to let everybody know that if you want to listen to this again, and why wouldn't you? Or if you missed it in the first place and folks who might be interested in this, it'll be recorded and end up at some point on the webpage where we have our solar webinar series. Also, if you might want to take a listen to a podcast that's kind of interesting called Watts Up, as in kilowatts, not what, but Watts Up. There's a lot of conversations going on that regarding clean energy, solar, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, like I said, we will reconstitute some more of these conversations in the winter, so I'll see you in December online, I hope. And again, Marta, thank you. Happy Thursday. Happy Thursday to everybody else, and take care.
Thanks, John.
See you later.